I worked for 50 Cent, and he told me that Pac wasn't supposed to be there. Those 7 words changed everything. A confession so dark, so heavy, that it fundamentally altered who I am as a person. What he said wasn't just words. It was a death sentence, wrapped in a casual sentence, delivered like he was asking me to pass the salt. And from that moment forward, my life split into 2 distinct parts. Before I knew, and after. Before I knew, I was just another face in his inner circle, someone with access and privilege. After I became a ghost, a prisoner of knowledge I can never fully speak, a haunting I can never escape. This is the story of how one confession destroyed everything I was and turned me into something I never wanted to become. By the end of this, you'll understand why I can never unhear what he told me, and why, even now in the quiet hours of the night, his words still echo in my mind like a curse I can't break. Before that confession, I was living in a world most people only dream about. I had access, real access. Not the kind you get from being a fan or a hanger on hoping to catch a glimpse. I'm talking about the kind of access that comes from being trusted with things that matter. I worked directly for 50 Cent, not as some low-level assistant fetching coffee, but as someone who was in the room when decisions were made, when money moved, when deals were struck in whispers and sealed with nods. I had my finger on the pulse of an empire built on music, power, and something darker that nobody talks about out loud. The world I inhabited was intoxicating. There's nothing quite like being inside the circle when you're on the outside looking in. The money was real, generational wealth kind of money. The cars, the houses, the connections to people who could make or break careers with a single phone call. But more than that, there was power, a specific kind of power that only exists in those rarefied spaces where the rules don't apply the same way they do for everyone else. 50 had built something extraordinary, and being part of that machinery meant you were part of something that mattered. Or at least that's what I told myself. I wasn't just some random person. I had earned my place, years of proving myself, of being reliable, of understanding the unwritten codes that governed that world. You don't ask questions you shouldn't ask. You don't repeat things you hear in private. You don't judge. You don't hesitate. You're loyal above all else. And loyalty in that world meant something absolute. It meant your life, your career, your future. Everything was tied to the person you served. And I had tied myself to 50 Cent completely. The inner circle wasn't large. That was the point. It was small, tight, and filled with people who had been tested and proven. There were maybe 10 of us who truly had access to everything. We knew things. We had seen things. We had done things. And we all carried the weight of that knowledge silently. That was the agreement. That was the price of admission. You kept your mouth shut, and you kept your privileges. Simple as that. But then things started to shift. It was subtle at first. The kind of shift you don't consciously notice until you step back and realize the landscape is completely changed. 50's behavior started to feel different, more guarded, more paranoid than usual. And when I say paranoid, I don't mean the casual kind of paranoia that comes from being famous and recognizing that people want things from you. I mean the deep, bone-level paranoia that only comes from knowing things, from carrying secrets so heavy that they warp your entire worldview. He started having conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. Not obvious stops. 50 was too intelligent for that, but real ones. A subtle shift in tone. A quick glance exchanged between him and whoever he was speaking with. A decision made silently to pivot the conversation in a different direction. I began noticing patterns. Certain people would come to see him, always at odd hours, always in private. They'd leave looking unsettled, sometimes angry, sometimes terrified. I never asked who they were or what they wanted. That wasn't my place. What I did notice was that the inner circle was starting to fracture. People I'd worked with for years were suddenly being phased out. Not fired. Exactly, it was more sophisticated than that. They'd be given assignments that took them away from the center of things. Projects that were important enough to keep them occupied, but removed them from the day-to-day operations. Slowly, quietly, they were being exiled, and I understood what that meant. They had fallen out of favor. They had either asked the wrong questions, known the wrong things, or simply couldn't be trusted with what was coming next. I realized I was being tested, more carefully than I had ever been tested before. Small things at first. Information I would casually mention to see if it made its way back to 50 through other channels. Tasks designed to see if I would follow orders without hesitation, no matter how unusual those orders were. Observations of how I reacted to certain conversations, certain names, certain topics. 50 was vetting me on a deeper level than ever before. He was deciding whether I was the kind of person who could be trusted with something bigger, something darker. There were things being discussed that I wasn't supposed to know about. I could feel it in the air. Conversations that happened just barely out of earshot. References to events that I didn't understand but knew I should never ask about. Names mentioned in passing that carried weight far beyond their syllables. A look would flash across 50's face when certain subjects came up. Something between nostalgia and dread, like he was remembering something he'd spent years trying to forget. One name in particular kept surfacing. Not frequently, but enough that I noticed. Enough that my brain started connecting dots, even though I desperately didn't want to. The name was tied to the past, to something that happened a long time ago. Something that had shaped everything that came after. And I had a terrible, creeping suspicion about what that something might be. For weeks, the tension built. I could feel it pressing down on me, this invisible weight that nobody acknowledged but everyone felt. The inner circle moved through those days like we were all holding our breath, like we were waiting for something inevitable to happen. There was a sense that the ground beneath our feet was unstable, that a seismic shift was coming, and we were all just trying to figure out when it would hit and who it would destroy. Then one day, 50 called me into his office. Just me. No one else. And I knew that this was the moment. This was the test I'd been preparing for without knowing it. This was the threshold. Once I walked through that door, once I heard what he had to say, I would either be promoted to the innermost circle, or I would be removed from his orbit entirely. There would be no middle ground, no going back. I remember walking down the hallway to his office. Each step felt heavier than the last. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what he was going to tell me, but I could feel the gravity of it. The weight of whatever confession or revelation was waiting on the other side of that door. 50 was sitting behind his desk, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there, looking out the window at the city beyond. He didn't look up when I entered. He just gestured for me to close the door behind me and sit down. The click of that door closing sounded like a lock turning, like I was stepping into a vault that I would never fully escape. He He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the cold calculation that usually defined his gaze. It was something more human, more vulnerable. For just a moment, he looked like a man who had been carrying something for so long that he desperately needed to set it down. Even if only for a moment. Even if it meant trusting someone else with the weight. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "And once I do, you need to understand what that means. You need to understand the position you're going to be in." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. "You're one of the few people I actually trust," he continued, "and that's rare for me. You know that. But I trust you because you understand the game. You understand how things work. You understand that some information is currency, and currency has value only if it stays protected." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm going to tell you something that very few people know. Something that I've carried for a very long time. And after I tell you, you're going to have a choice to make." I felt my stomach tighten. "You can ask me never to speak of it again, and I'll respect that. You can walk away from this conversation and pretend it never happened. I'll still trust you. I'll still keep you in the circle. But you'll always be wondering what I was about to say. You'll always be on the outside of the innermost ring." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Or," he said, "you can hear what I have to say. You can become part of something bigger. Something that only a handful of people in this world understand. But if you do that, you're never going back. You'll be bound to this knowledge forever. You'll carry it every single day for the rest of your life. And you'll have to accept that." I realized I was holding my breath. My hands were shaking slightly, and I folded them in my lap to hide it. "What's it going to be?" he asked. In that moment, I stood at a crossroads. I could sense it with absolute clarity. This was the moment. This was where my life was about to change irrevocably. This was the threshold between the life I had been living and the life I was about to enter. And I knew with a certainty that terrified me that once I answered, there would be no going back. I should have walked out of that room. I should have told him I didn't want to know. I should have chosen ignorance and safety. I should have understood that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. That some knowledge is a poison that slowly destroys you from the inside out. But I didn't. And then he said something that made my blood go cold. I leaned forward slightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I want to know," I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. 50 nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, like he'd already known what I would choose before I said it. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights below. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stood there, looking out at the sprawl of buildings and streets and lives happening all around us. Lives that had no idea what was being discussed in this room. Lives that were simple and uncomplicated in ways that would never be available to us again. "There's something about carrying a secret," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't just sit with you. It doesn't just live in your mind quietly, waiting to be remembered when you're alone. It becomes part of your DNA. It changes how you see the world, how you see people. It makes you paranoid, but not in a way that's irrational. It makes you paranoid because you understand on a cellular level that knowledge is dangerous. That the wrong people knowing the wrong things can destroy everything you've built." He turned to face me, and his expression was haunted, genuinely haunted. Like he was looking at a ghost only he could see. I've been carrying something for a very long time, he continued, since the mid-90s. Since before most of this, he gestured vaguely around the office, at the empire we were sitting in the heart of existed. And it's shaped every decision I've made, every move I've made, every alliance, every enemy. It's all connected to this one thing, this one moment, this one night. I felt something shift in the room. The air became heavier, darker, like a storm was moving in, and we were the only two people who could feel it coming. Do you know what it's like? 50 asked. To know something that could change everything? To know something that, if the right people found out, would set off a chain reaction that would destroy not just you, but everyone connected to you? I didn't answer. I didn't think he was asking for a response. I've spent 25 years protecting this secret. 25 years of strategic positioning, strategic alliances, strategic violence if necessary. All of it designed to keep this one piece of information locked down. To keep it buried so deep that nobody could ever find it. To make sure that the people who know what I know are either completely loyal, completely terrified, or completely dead. He paused, and that last phrase hung in the air like a threat. And I'm telling you this because I think you need to understand the weight of what I'm about to say. I'm telling you this because you need to know that this isn't just gossip or hearsay. This is real. This is documented. This is something I was there for. Something I know to be absolutely, undeniably true. He walked back to his desk and sat down again. He looked smaller somehow. More human, more broken. Tupac wasn't supposed to be there, he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the ground beneath my feet had shifted. I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said, trying to understand the implications of those 7 words. What do you mean? I heard myself ask, though my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from very far away. 50 looked at me for a long moment. Exactly what I said. Pac wasn't supposed to be there that night. He wasn't supposed to be in that car. He wasn't supposed to be in Las Vegas. He was supposed to be somewhere else entirely. But he changed his mind at the last minute. And because he changed his mind, because he decided to go to that party instead of staying where he was supposed to be, everything that happened next happened. My mind was spinning. The implications were staggering. Was he saying that Tupac's death was a case of wrong place, wrong time? Was he saying that Tupac died because of a random decision? Or was he saying something darker, that someone had been planning something, and Tupac's unexpected presence had set it all in motion? Who was supposed to be there instead? I asked. 50 shook his head slowly. That's as far as I'm going to go with this. I've told you what I'm going to tell you. The rest is for you to piece together. Or not. It's for you to decide what you do with this information. But I started, and he held up his hand to silence me. No, he said firmly. That's it. That's all you get. I've given you the key. What you do with it is up to you. But understand this. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a tone that was almost threatening. This information is a liability. It's not an asset. It's not something that's going to make your life better or easier. It's only going to make your life harder. It's only going to make you paranoid. It's only going to make you question everything you see, everything you hear, everyone you meet. So I need you to really think about whether you want to carry this. Because once you start carrying it, you can't put it down. I sat there in silence, trying to absorb what he'd just told me. My mind was racing through 1,000 different scenarios, 1,000 different interpretations of what he'd said. The vagueness of it was maddening. It was precise enough to be meaningful, but unclear enough to be deniable. It was a confession wrapped in plausible deniability. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because I need someone to know," 50 said quietly. "I've been carrying this alone for too long. And I need someone I trust to know that I know. I need someone who can verify, if necessary, that this isn't just some fantasy or paranoid delusion. I need a witness to my knowledge, even if that witness can never speak about it." He leaned back in his chair, and suddenly he looked exhausted, like the act of speaking those words had drained something essential from him. "You're going to go home tonight, and you're going to replay this conversation 1,000 times. You're going to try to figure out exactly what I meant. You're going to start researching, start looking for connections, start piecing things together, and you're going to find some things that match up with what I've said, and you're going to find some things that don't, and you're going to become obsessed with filling in the gaps." He was right. I could feel it already happening. My brain was already starting to construct theories, to connect dots, to build narratives. And that, he continued, is the curse. That's the price you pay for knowing what I know. You become trapped in a prison of your own questions. You become a prisoner of the knowledge that something is true, but you can never fully understand what that something is. I felt a chill run down my spine, because I understood what he was saying. I understood that he wasn't just telling me a secret. He was passing on a burden. He was infecting me with the same paranoia, the same obsession, the same curse that had been eating away at him for 25 years. "I had one more thing I wanted to tell you," he said, standing up and walking me toward the door. "What's that?" I asked. "Once you leave this room, we never speak of this again. Not directly, not indirectly, not in hints or coded language. If you need to talk to someone about what I've told you, you talk to me. And if you can't reach me, you don't talk to anyone. You keep it locked up inside, and you learn to live with it. That's the rule. That's the only way this works." I nodded numbly. He opened the door, and the sound seemed to echo through the entire building. "And one more thing," he said as I stepped into the hallway. "Don't try to verify what I've told you. Don't try to find the truth. Some truths are dangerous not because they're false, but because they're true. And if you start digging, if you start asking the wrong questions to the wrong people, well, let's just say that there are people who have spent a lot of time and effort making sure certain things stay buried. And they don't take kindly to people who try to unearth them." I turned back to look at him, and his face was unreadable. "Enjoy your evening," he said, and then he closed the door. I stood in that hallway for I don't know how long. Minutes. Hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. All I could think about was those 7 words. Tupac wasn't supposed to be there. They echoed in my mind like a mantra, like a curse, like a question that could never be answered. I walked out of that building in a daze. The night air hit my face, and it felt like I was waking up from a dream I couldn't quite remember. But I wasn't waking up. I was sinking deeper into something darker, something that would consume me completely before I even understood what was happening. But what I didn't realize was that knowing this secret was going to destroy me. I didn't sleep that night. I went home, I sat on my couch, and I stared at the wall for hours. My mind was a hurricane of questions, theories, and impossible connections. Tupac wasn't supposed to be there. Those words played on repeat in my head like a broken record, each iteration bringing with it new layers of meaning, new angles of interpretation. By 3 a.m., I was on my laptop. I told myself I was just going to do a little research, just look up some basic facts about that night in 1996. Just remind myself of the timeline. Nothing obsessive, nothing dangerous, just innocent curiosity. But that's the thing about secrets, they're like a virus. They spread, they multiply, they consume everything they touch. I started with what everyone knows. September 7th, 1996. Las Vegas. The Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. Tupac was there to watch the fight with Suge Knight. After the fight, they went to a party. Then Tupac got in a car, and a few minutes later, he was shot. 6 days later, he was dead. That's the official story. That's what the news reported. That's what everyone believes. But 50 hadn't said that Tupac was shot by accident. He hadn't said that Tupac was killed by a stray bullet meant for someone else. He'd said something more specific. He'd said that Tupac wasn't supposed to be there, that he was supposed to be somewhere else, that he changed his mind at the last minute. Which meant what? Exactly. I started pulling up articles from that night. Photos, interview transcripts, anything I could find. I was looking for something, a detail, a contradiction, a hint that would unlock what 50 had been trying to tell me. I was searching for the piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. Around 4 a.m., I found something. There was an interview with someone who claimed to have been at the party that night. They mentioned that Tupac almost didn't go, that he'd been planning to do something else. The details were vague, but the person said Tupac had changed his mind at the last minute and decided to go to the party instead. It was a small detail, barely mentioned, probably forgotten by most people who read it. But to me, in that moment, it felt like a confirmation. It felt like proof that 50 was telling the truth. But it also raised 1,000 new questions. Who was supposed to be at that party instead? Or was Tupac supposed to be somewhere else entirely, and his unexpected presence had somehow triggered what happened next? Was someone waiting for someone else, and Tupac's presence had set off a chain reaction? Or was it something else entirely? Something I couldn't even conceive of yet because I didn't have enough information. I spent the next week in a state of controlled obsession. I had a job to do, people to answer to, a life to maintain. But every spare moment, every lunch break, every evening, every sleepless night, I was digging. I was researching. I was trying to piece together the puzzle that 50 had handed me. I started making connections. Some of them were probably real. Most of them were probably products of my increasingly paranoid mind. But I couldn't stop. The more I researched, the more I found, the deeper I went. It was like I was descending into a rabbit hole. And with every level I went down, the hole got darker and more twisted. I discovered rumors, whispers from the streets, claims from people who said they knew what really happened, theories from internet forums populated by people who'd been obsessing over this exact question for decades. Some of it was clearly nonsense, the kind of conspiracy thinking that exists in the spaces between what we know and what we desperately want to believe. But some of it seemed to have a logic to it, a coherence, a consistency. I started keeping notebooks, first in digital form, hidden in encrypted folders on my laptop. Then, as my paranoia grew, in physical form. Actual paper notebooks that I kept hidden in places I thought were secure. I was documenting everything, every connection I found, every theory I developed, every piece of evidence that seemed to support 50's cryptic confession. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized something terrifying. I was finding more questions, not answers. Every answer I thought I'd found just led to 3 more questions. Every theory I constructed had holes in it. Every connection I made could be explained away as coincidence. I was chasing ghosts. I was building castles out of smoke and wishful thinking. And that's when the paranoia really started to set in. It began subtly. A feeling that I was being watched. A sense that my research wasn't as private as I thought it was. I'd leave my laptop in a certain position, and later it would be slightly different. I'd have tabs open in a specific order, and when I came back to it, they'd been reorganized. Small things. Things that could easily be explained by my own absent-mindedness. But I knew. On some level, I knew that I was being monitored. The worst part was that I had no way to know who was doing it. Was it 50? Was he checking to see how far I was digging? Making sure I wasn't getting too close to something I shouldn't? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew that 50 had told me something, and they wanted to know what it was? Someone who saw me as a threat? Every time my phone rang, I wondered if it was being tracked. Every time I went out, I wondered if I was being followed. I started taking different routes to work. I started varying my routines. I stopped going to the same coffee shops, the same restaurants, the same places where someone could predict where I'd be. I was becoming a ghost. I was becoming the very thing that 50 had warned me I'd become. A prisoner of my own knowledge, haunted by questions I couldn't answer, and paranoia I couldn't control. And the worst part? I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I had a girlfriend at the time. We'd been together for 3 years. I was pulling away from her, spending more and more time alone, staring at my computer screen or my notebooks, lost in my own obsession. She asked me what was wrong. She begged me to tell her what was happening. And I couldn't. I literally couldn't. Because 50 had made it clear that if I spoke to anyone else about what he'd told me, there would be consequences. So I lied. I told her it was work stress. I told her I was just going through something personal that I needed to figure out on my own. I told her it wasn't about her, that it had nothing to do with how I felt about her. All lies. Or not lies exactly, but incomplete truths. Because the truth was that I was terrified. The truth was that I was slowly losing my mind, and I couldn't tell anyone why, because the knowledge itself was something I had to keep locked up inside. My relationship started to crumble. My work started to suffer. I was distracted, unfocused, making mistakes that I would never have made before. People started to notice. My supervisor pulled me aside one day and asked if everything was okay. I assured him it was. I assured him that I was fine. That everything was fine. All while my world was falling apart at the seams. 2 months after my conversation with 50, I was sitting in a coffee shop, a new one I'd never been to before, and I saw something that made my blood go cold. There was a man sitting 3 tables away, reading a newspaper. But he wasn't really reading. His eyes kept flicking up toward me. Every time I looked away, I could feel his gaze on me. And when I looked back, he'd quickly return to his newspaper. It was the oldest surveillance trick in the book. And it was so obvious that I knew it was intentional. He wanted me to know I was being watched. I got up and left immediately. I drove around the city for an hour, taking random turns, trying to figure out if he was following me. I never actually confirmed it, but I never shook the feeling that he was, that everyone was, that there were people watching me, waiting to see what I would do with the information 50 had given me. That night, I made a decision. I was going to stop. I was going to burn the notebooks. I was going to delete all the research from my laptop. I was going to walk away from the obsession and try to reclaim some semblance of a normal life. But I couldn't do it. I sat there with those notebooks in my hands, ready to throw them in the fireplace, and I just couldn't. Because destroying them felt like destroying the only proof that what 50 had told me was real. It felt like admitting that I was crazy, that I'd made it all up, that none of it mattered. And if it didn't matter, then what did? If this wasn't real, wasn't significant, then what was I? Just another paranoid person chasing ghosts? Just another conspiracy theorist lost in the depths of internet rabbit holes? No. 50 had told me something. Something real. Something true. And I had to know what it was. So instead of burning the notebooks, I hid them deeper. Instead of deleting the research, I reorganized it, created more layers of encryption, more barriers between my obsession and anyone who might try to access it. I doubled down. I committed myself fully to the hunt. And with that commitment came a terrifying realization. I was no longer trying to understand what 50 had told me. I was trying to survive the knowledge of it. But I had no idea that my obsession was about to pull me into a world I could never escape. 3 months in, my life was collapsing. My girlfriend left. My job was hanging by a thread. The paranoia was constant now. Every car, every person, every call felt like a threat. I was building a theory that what happened to Tupac wasn't random. It was orchestrated, and 50 knew who did it. One night, an unknown number called. "You need to stop," the distorted voice said. "Stop digging. Stop asking questions. Because if you don't, people are going to start asking questions about you." The line went dead. They were watching me, actually watching me, which meant I was getting close to something. I went to see 50. I needed answers. His assistant said he was unavailable, out of the country. For 2 weeks, he was completely unreachable. I spiraled. Then he called. "I made a mistake telling you what I told you," he said coldly. "You've lost your job, lost your relationship. And now you're bringing attention to yourself, which brings attention to me. I can't stop," I said. "Then you're on your own," he replied. And he hung up. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about infecting me. 50 had taken the burden he'd carried for 25 years and transferred it to someone else. He'd passed his curse to me, and now he was walking away. I was alone with a secret that was destroying my life. But I wasn't the first person he'd done this to. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by notebooks and research, I realized something that made my skin crawl. I wasn't the first. I started digging into 50's inner circle. The people who'd been close to him over the years. The ones who'd suddenly disappeared from public life. The ones who'd become reclusive, paranoid, self-destructive. At first, I thought it was coincidence. But then the pattern became undeniable. There was his first bodyguard, a guy named Marcus who'd worked for him in the late 90s. Marcus had a mental breakdown in 2003. Spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility. When he came out, he refused to talk about his time with 50. Refused to even say his name. Then there was a producer who'd worked on some of 50's early albums. Brilliant guy. Then one day he just stopped producing entirely. Became a recluse. Started seeing a therapist 4 times a week. His therapist's notes were leaked online years later. Fragments that talked about unbearable knowledge and paranoia that might be justified. There was an accountant, a manager, a security consultant. All of them had been close to 50 at critical points in his career. All of them had experienced sudden, dramatic changes in their mental health and behavior. All of them had pulled away from him abruptly, as if they'd been cut loose. They all had the same pattern I was experiencing. 50 wasn't just a businessman or a mogul. He was something else entirely. He was a carrier, a vector for psychological destruction. He identified people he could trust, people who were smart enough to understand implications, isolated enough to feel special, and vulnerable enough to accept a burden they could never share. And then he infected them with knowledge that would consume them for the rest of their lives. I found one of them online, a guy named David who'd been 50's personal assistant in the early 2000s. He was living in a small town in Oregon now, completely off the grid. I managed to contact him through an encrypted email service. "Don't ask me what he told you," David wrote back. "Don't try to verify it. Don't try to find others like us. Just know that you're not alone, and that's both a comfort and a curse." I asked him how long it took before the obsession stopped consuming him. His response chilled me. "It doesn't. You just get better at hiding it." I realized then that this was my life now. This was who I'd become. Not someone seeking answers, but someone learning to live with unanswerable questions. Not someone trying to escape the burden, but someone learning to carry it in ways that were less visible to the outside world. The curse had become my identity. And that's when I understood what 50 had really given me. Not a secret, but a prison sentence. 5 years later, I'm still here. Still researching, still obsessing, still haunted by words that may or may not mean what I think they mean. I've built a life around the margins of normalcy, a job that doesn't demand too much, an apartment that's secure, routines that keep me grounded enough to function. But every night, I'm back at my desk, back with my notebooks, back searching for the final piece that will make it all make sense. I've learned to recognize the signs in other people now, the ones who've been infected like I have. The glazed look in their eyes when they're thinking about something they can never share. The way they flinch at certain names or dates. The careful distance they maintain from anyone who gets too close. There are more of us than you'd think. Sometimes I wonder if 50 is still doing it. If he's still identifying vulnerable people and whispering secrets into their ears. If there's a whole network of us out there, all carrying the same burden, all haunted by the same impossible knowledge. What he told me that night still plays in my head constantly. Tupac wasn't supposed to be there. 7 words. That's all it took to destroy everything I was and remake me into something else entirely. I've thought about going to the authorities. But with what? A confession from a dead man's inner circle about a conspiracy I can't prove? They'd laugh me out of the precinct. Or worse, they'd take me seriously. And then I'd have real problems. I've thought about confronting 50 again, but I know better now. He's moved on. He's already forgotten about me. If he ever thought about me at all, beyond what I represented. Another vessel for his curse. Another person to carry the weight he was tired of carrying alone. The most terrifying part is this. I don't even know if what he told me is true anymore. After 5 years of obsession, after all my research and all my theories and all my connections, I've reached a point where I can't distinguish between what I know and what I've convinced myself I know. The line between reality and paranoia has blurred so completely that they're indistinguishable. Maybe Tupac's death was exactly what it appeared to be. A random street crime. A tragedy. Nothing more. Maybe 50 was just messing with me. Testing me, seeing how far I'd go. Maybe the whole thing was psychological manipulation, and the real curse was just the knowledge that I'd been manipulated, that I'd been weak enough to let it happen. Or maybe he was telling the truth, and the truth is so dangerous that the only way to survive it is to slowly go insane. I'll probably never know. But here's what I do know. If you're watching this, if you're listening to my story and thinking about reaching out to someone like 50, someone who claims they have dangerous knowledge to share, don't. Don't listen. Don't let them infect you with their burden, because once they do, once that knowledge takes root in your mind, there's no going back. You become haunted, not by ghosts or spirits or supernatural forces. You become haunted by the gap between what you know and what you can prove. You become haunted by the isolation of carrying a secret you can never share. You become haunted by the slow realization that your life will never be normal again. What he told me still haunts me, and it always will. The scariest part? I'm not sure if I'm warning you or inviting you to join us.